Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. I've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. We have a bracketology episode here ready for you. I got Jason Carmelo on from Big Underdog. He was with us a couple weeks ago to talk some bracketology. And as we enter into the Big Ten tournament, thought it was a good time to bring him on once again, talk through not just the teams that could possibly make it, but also the seeding, maybe what teams might face some other teams, or maybe some options of other seeds in that range, stuff like that. So it'll be really interesting to talk about. Jason, how are we doing tonight? Where can people find you at?
We're doing good. You can find me at big-underdog.com and at Big Underdog Blog on X.
There we go. Very good. Very good. You got Philip here, resident Illinois fan, IL. There you go, Philip. We will be talking Illinois. Don't you worry. We have a couple teams I want to get to before then. Jason, I thought it was only right that with Michigan State winning the Big Ten, the everything they went through here at the end of the season, just what they were able to do. Let's start with Michigan State. Michigan State, I think I said Michigan won the Big Ten. Michigan State won the Big Ten. If
Yep.
I said that wrong, I apologize. Michigan State. There's some people vying for them to have a one seed right now. I mean, are they any close to that? You think two seed is probably more the lock? What are your thoughts here?
JR, good question. I think 3-1 seeds are all locked up, right?
Mm.
There's probably an 85% chance that Auburn takes the number one overall. I guess if they lose in their quarterfinal game, there's a path if Duke wins the ACC tournament that Duke could take it. So let's just call it like this. Auburn takes a one seed, Duke takes the second, Houston will take the third. Those three are locked in. So everybody's fighting for the fourth. The issue ahead of Michigan State is that the SEC has been so fundamentally dominant that one of those schools has occupied that the entire length of the season. So it's hard to change it 31, 32 games in. Right now I would probably give it to Florida, but then Alabama won at Auburn. Alabama's on their heels, Tennessee's on their heels, and then Michigan State's kind of in that mix for the two line. I think I think the path for Michigan State is probably the top of the two line. Is there an outside possibility if Tennessee and Florida and Alabama are they all losing the quarters that Michigan State could find a way there? Yes, but I think it's really highly unlikely. It's probably under 10% chance that they find a path there. Izzo is going to be a 2 seed on Sunday, and it's a phenomenal seed for a team that really started out the year bumpy, right? And they started out the season, they lost to Kansas, they lost to Memphis, and they started the season at 5-2, and from then on, I mean, they were fantastic. The stretch of games when you beat Illinois, Purdue, Michigan, Maryland, Wisconsin in a row, I mean, that's phenomenal basketball. Especially, we talked about it last time, especially for a team that's 337th in the country in three-point shooting. So they will outwork you, they will out-rebound you, and a 2 seed is a wonderful year, but I think they cap out there.
Yeah, two seed, obviously a great year for Michigan State, especially in this conference. We know how tough it is to win in the Big Ten, just the depth of it all and everything. The SEC's been great this year, no doubt, but I do think that the SEC has a couple bottom tier teams that just don't seem to be able to beat the biggest teams in the conference. And I would argue in this one, we saw it with Washington. They took Oregon to overtime. Now
Yeah.
Oregon is not Michigan State, but we did see what Oregon was able to do in the non-conference. So this is still a very deep, very good conference, and for Michigan State to get there playing in this conference, it is very impressive. So some of the teams that you have on the 15 line right now, which obviously, if Michigan State is a 2 seed, that's who they would be playing: Northern Colorado, Robert Morris, Central Connecticut, Norfolk State. Uh, are you thinking you're most confident in any of those on the 15 line, or are you feeling that one of them might face Michigan State? Any thoughts here?
Yeah, Robert Morris has had a really good year. They're pretty good defensively. But fundamentally, I think where the traction starts to happen with a lot of the potential upsets, quite honestly, is starting to head towards the 14 line, or you can start to see a team, depending on the outcome of some of the games and as they turn out, you start to see some of those teams that have been really competitive in competitive environments during the season. But I think Michigan State should be okay, kind of getting through that 15 realm. Sometimes you get through, and a couple of years ago when Ohio State played Oral Roberts had two pros, right? They had They had O'Banner and A. Smith, and they both played at Texas and Texas Tech the following year. So when you have kind of these hidden gems of teams that are really skilled, so far this year with the teams that have advanced, that's not the case. I think Izzo will be just fine.
Interesting. So no NBA players or anything like that on these 15 seeds to be
I
surprised by.
haven't seen any yet. There was some you got to be careful with when you get into senior or junior or senior players of the year in their conference. Those teams are dangerous, right? That's what Oakland had last year,
Mm.
and that's what James Madison had. Edwards, now he's at Louisville, and so you get these players, so you got to be careful with it. So as of now, though, I think Izzo will be okay.
All right, very good. All right, good news for you, Michigan State fans. We do. Philip is asking about Pepperdine and Ohio State. We're going to get to Ohio State a little bit later, and I'll star this one for Pepperdine in particular. John is asking about just overall. Drake is going to the tourney, or he's not asking about it. Drake is going to the tourney as well. I believe they played Bradley
Yeah.
in their championship game. Any chance for Bradley to make the NCAA tournament, or they
No,
needed to win that game?
Bradley splits aren't good enough. They're a really good team. I actually spent time on Friday at the Missouri Valley tournament. Went down there and watched some games. Drake's fantastic. McCollum came from the Division II program, Northwest Missouri State, where he was really, really good there for many, many years. Won a bunch of national titles. What's fun about Drake is if you're listening and kind of talking, thinking about brackets this time next week, Drake is 364th. That's dead last in the country in pace, in tempo. So
Wow.
every possession, they hold on to the ball, and they are very comfortable playing within the last 4 or 5 seconds of the shot clock. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What that means is that they limit possessions of the opponent so much that if the game is low scoring, and if Drake, who shoots free throws pretty well, if they're up 8, it's really like being up 12 or 14. And that's what they do. They kind of squeeze the blood out of the teams late in the games. They're very well coached. Their point guard's fantastic. And Drake can absolutely do some damage. Drake's going to probably end up on the 10 line. Bradley won't get in. It's a one bid league this year, which is good for a team like Ohio State so far. But Drake has the ability to do some damage. They probably get lined up with maybe a Louisville or an Illinois or someone like that, and it could be a really entertaining game.
Yeah, for sure. It doesn't look like you have any Big Ten teams on that 8 line, so sounds like Big Ten teams aren't going to have to worry about the 8-point lead of of Drake being much higher than maybe it looks like. So
Yep.
let's get to our next team here. We have Wisconsin. Now you have Wisconsin currently on the 4 line with all Big Ten teams on the 4 line. That's
Yeah.
really interesting.
There's a lot of traffic there. A lot of
Yeah,
traffic. I don't think it'll sort out like that, right? Because there'll be some
right.
wins and losses in the tournaments, and that'll adjust a little bit. I think some may slide to a 3 or a 5, but for now, there's 4 Big Ten teams in the 4 spot, which is very, 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 very rare.
It is. It is. Well, and that was going to be my question to you is I feel like one or two of these have to either move up or down. Do you see Wisconsin pretty much cemented at a 4 line, or could you see a move up or down? I know that Penn State loss kind of hurt
Yeah.
them. I don't know if that drops them an entire seed line or anything like that,
Yeah,
but
that dropped him a seed line. You're exactly right,
okay.
JR. I had him at the 3. That dropped him down to the 4. And there's even a path for them finishing around the 5. They'll probably bottom out as a 5. They've had a fantastic season. Keep in mind, I think it's really important for the listeners. The committee has established rules over the last probably 10 to 12 years that they've graded, and we talked about this last time, but they grade the conference tournament games they don't have the same impact, right? They grade them more lightly. Listen, they're just like anybody else. Like they have an assignment to get this in by Sunday. And almost half the committee this year are first time members. So they're going to try to be getting in the vast majority of the work in on Thursday and Friday. So they are not scrambling Saturday and Sunday. I've talked to some people, I've listened to some things, and they've got a lot of mid-major people that have not done this before, and they're very intelligent in what they're doing. But just like anything else, the first time you do it, they're going to try to get it done. And so I don't necessarily think you get full credit for the wins late in the conference tournament. We see that all the time with the Big Ten, right? You're like, okay, that put a team in, or hey, that they're for sure in right now, and then their name isn't called on Selection Sunday. It's because the vast majority of the movement is already done. Very slight movement will happen between then and now.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So Wisconsin on the 4 line, they would be playing somebody on the 13 line. Right now, you have Akron, Lipscomb, High Point, Liberty. Any teams there in particular you feel like are really solid at the 13 that you could see facing Wisconsin? What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, y- over the years, MAC schools have been really dangerous in the tournament, right?
Hmm.
Akron is dangerous because they can really score the ball. They're in the top, 35 or so in field goal percentage. They don't turn the ball over very much, and they can really rebound, especially for a mid-major team. So Akron's going to give someone a handful in that kind of 13 or so range. I don't think they can get quite to the 12, so they'll probably sit on the front end of the 13 line. And I'd say Akron's really good. Listen, they're coached, and Illinois fans, right? They're coached by John Gross, who spent time in the MAC, and then he went, right, Akron, and then he went to
Hmm.
Illinois for a few years. And I think there were moments of where they did a good job, and there's moments where he really struggled. Obviously, he's out, and he's back at Akron.
Interesting. Very interesting. Got some really good questions from the chat. I do want to bring up as we kind of are in between teams. UC San Diego or McNeese State? I got to be honest. I don't really have a thought on this one, Jason, but I know you pay more attention to national college basketball than I do. So which one do you trust more?
I better be able to answer this. I'm going to go UC San Diego because they've already shown that they can win at Utah State.
Yeah.
Again, if you're bubble teams, we can go through, we can get to Ohio State and such, but UC San Diego is a team that is absolutely in the mix for an at-large selection. So for those of you listening, an at-large selection means a team did not win their conference tournament, and they are selected as an at-large team. They're selected from a pool of teams by the NCAA committee to make the tournament. UC San Diego is absolutely on that list. I would take them. McNeese is coached by Will Wade, right? The former
Yeah.
LSU coach who ran into some trouble there. And now he's bounced around at McNeese. Very skilled, very, very good offensively. But I'll take UC San Diego because they won at Utah State.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The other question John had, and I actually thought about this when we were talking about him. I don't know why I didn't bring it up, but McCollum's style of play seems interesting. It would really be quite the change of pace if Iowa moved on from Fran McCaffrey and brought in Ben McCollum, who
Oh,
it seems
wow.
like Iowa fans have been thinking about. I mean, could you see a style of play like that working in, maybe not just the Big Ten, but like a high major type of conference or anything?
Yeah, John, that's a really good question. I think it could. Again, I was able to spend time courtside watching the games, and they are it pace is one thing, being well coached is another. Like some guys
Yeah.
can just coach, and he can just coach. I think he'd have to make some adjustments to it, right? He'd have to bring in certain skill types that can do a little bit of both. In years past, not this Wisconsin team, but in years past, Wisconsin followed this model, right? Virginia followed this model. Methodical, play defense, limit opponents' possessions, make it just enough threes, and be just enough athletically skilled enough to kind of win. So I do think it can translate. I think he's going to get offers from high majors, whether it's whether it's Iowa or such. Whether he takes it or not, I don't know. Missouri Valley is a good gig, but obviously it's not Iowa. I think it can translate. He'll have to make some small adjustments. He'll have to get a couple scores, right? He'll have to get a couple dudes that can really put the ball in the basket and not be completely dependent on slow tempo. But yes, I mean when you spend time there and watch it, absolutely, yeah,
Yeah, you can build the team the right way, and I mean that would just be an absolutely frustrating thing for some coaches to face in the Big Ten, especially a team like Michigan State this year, who just relies
yeah.
so much on the fast break and everything. To see a team just slow the game down like that would be infuriating for the coach, I'm sure.
Right. The team is based on their core of just intangibles, right? Michigan
Hmm.
State. And then Jace Richardson came in and just developed over time to be the guy. And so they have just enough athleticism and he's dynamic enough that he changes the math and increases the ceiling. And I think the model for McCollum is Virginia. So there's absolutely a path to do it. If Tony Bennett was one of a kind, but if he can be anything like that, they'll be in good shape.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. All right, let's get to another defensive-minded team, UCLA. They've really sparked up their offense a little bit more this season, kind of the team style offense rather than what they had with
Yeah.
Johnny Juzang and stuff like that they were doing. I like this team the way Mick Cronin has put it together. I do see some flaws that could be problematic for him. You have him on the 6 seed line right
Yeah.
now, right there with St. Mary's, who's currently winning over Pepperdine. Well, Ohio State fans will hopefully, or will hope that that continues for St. Mary to win that. But thoughts here on UCLA, their seed line, and stuff like that?
I really like UCLA. The more I watch them, the more I like them. I'm probably higher on them than some other bracketologists out there. Some have them either on the back of the 6 or even the 7 line. I think there's a path for UCLA to get all the way up to a 5 seed. Um, like you said, JR, the big thing this year is they can score. They can score a little bit. And they shoot the ball from the perimeter so much better. But what's nice is that they've got an offense and a defense in the top 50 efficiency. So as you're going to pick teams, Ken Palm does a lot of metrics, and I think some people are higher on metrics than others, but I'll tell you this. When you look to evaluate teams that can make a Final Four, you have got to play both offense and defense traditionally in the top 50 and both sides of the ball. Because what happens is to make a Final Four, you got to win 4 games. So at some point during that stretch, you're going to play a team that's a different tempo, different style, and you have to lean on both of them to get through 4 games. The problem is, historically, over 85% of the teams that have made a Final Four in the last 12 years, over 85% are in the top 50 defense and offense. So you can't have just one leg of the stool. So to do that, UCLA this year, they've got in the top 40 on offense, obviously in the top 15 defensively. That's plenty good enough to score when they absolutely need to. So I think it's a team that could really be a dark horse to make a Final Four. They play so hard, and defensively, they're always there under Cronin. And because they can shoot the ball so much better this year, they can. They're experienced, they're talented, they play hard. Um, in a lot of ways, they're very much like Texas Tech, only they're not quite as skilled offensively, but they're very similar. Speaking of which, would be a heck of a 6-3 game. Um, but it's that type of team where a lot of people, Texas Tech could end up as a 2 seed, and a lot of people will take them to make a Final Four. UCLA statistically is not that different, so they're a very dangerous team.
Yeah, I think this UCLA team offensively is best when Kobe Johnson is being efficient. He doesn't necessarily have to be the guy, but I
Yeah,
think in that USC game, he was like 1 for 4 from three or something like that. They were able to get away with it because USC just decided to pretty much play no defense on Daly and and
yeah,
Sky Clark and everything. But overall, which speaking of Sky Clark, he's been a revelation for this team offensively as well with some of his 3-point shooting. What he's been able to do has really been nice for him. I know Illinois fans were wondering how he would do there, and turns out it's been pretty good for him. I guess the Mick Cronin style of coaching is working out for him. So,
yeah.
6 seed line faces the 11 seed in this scenario. So, are we looking at UCLA if they get that 6 seed? Is there any chance they get the play-in game on the 11 line? What's your thoughts here?
Yeah, they might, right? They'll keep them away from a team like Indiana on that line.
Yeah.
There's probably a high probability at this point that they're going to run, one of these teams are going to run into Utah State, a San Diego State, one of these Mountain West teams that are really pretty skilled. A San Diego State team would be a very similar approach, right? San Diego State for many, many years has really guarded. So I think there's a high chance around that 11 line, you're going to get a couple Mountain West teams, whether it's Boise State or Colorado State that sneaks in, or Utah State or San Diego State. All those teams are right around that cut line. And a Big Ten team is going to have to run up against them pretty soon. And all those teams are pretty skilled. San Diego State is the best defensively of them. I think this year, Utah State is the best coached team of all of them. Calhoun's done a fantastic job in his first year there. And Colorado State has the best player, but they may not be able to make the tournament. So all in all, I think maybe a San Diego State rivalry could brew there on the West Coast, and it'd be a really game might be in the 50s at that point.
Any team on that 11 seed line that maybe in the playing game, not in the playing game, but like you know the style of play of UCLA and stuff like that.
Yeah,
Like any team in particular that you would think UCLA would kind of be praying not to see based on style of play and what they're able to do.
it'd be San Diego State.
Okay.
because they would take the game and they would drag it in the mud, and they would keep it in the, again, the game's probably going to be played in the mid 50s. And when it's in the mid 50s, it's literally a toss up.
Yeah.
And when you get down to that, some pressure builds usually on the, the higher seed team, the better seed team. And then just, sometimes the nerves get to you and you get beat. So I would say San Diego State, because their style of play is so similar that when, if UCLA can get out and run, I think they beat an Oklahoma team. If they can get out and run, they'll be just fine and get some easy baskets. They're not going to get that against the Aztecs. So
Yeah, very good. All right, let's move on to Illinois. Philip, I'd like to hear about the Illini here. Illinois, you have them as a 7 seed right now. I think Illinois has the opportunity to possibly go to a Final Four. They kind of
absolutely.
struggled this season with the way the season's gone with their sickness and stuff like that. Took a little while for the team to kind of gel a little bit more, but when this team is on and when they're shooting well,
Yeah.
the athleticism, the NBA talent they have on this team, it's really, really hard to stop them. And typically, when they're shooting well, that translates to good defense for them too. That was one of the things that impressed me the most at the beginning of the season for Illinois was how much good defense they were playing. So, are you locked in at the 7 seed for them here, Jason? And I mean, what do you think about the ceiling of Illinois this season?
Illinois ceiling's really high. I've wrote some works throughout the year. They are wildly talented, wildly skilled, and wildly inconsistent. And to be honest, they've been that way under Underwood for stretches where yes, you can argue as a whole they've been good. Of course, they've been good, but at times, some years they haven't reached the potential that they should. You watch them play, and you're like, this team should make a Final Four. And to be honest, with Illinois, it's about every single year under Underwood they could have made a Final Four. So with this team, like you said, they've had sickness, they've had injuries, they've been banged up, and they shoot 317th in the country in 3-point shooting. So if they make anywhere near double-digit threes, if they get anywhere near 10 threes a game, they end up throttling people because they're really, really skilled otherwise. And you're right, defensively, they've been better this year as well. I think they can a 7 line for now. They can absolutely get to a 6, maybe even a 5, because they're dynamic. Their metrics are fantastic. So they are a team that in the conference tournament, they can make up a little bit of ground here and get to that 5 or 6 line, because I think everybody that watches them knows that how banged up they were. Listen, the committee is responsible for keeping track of these things. The committee is responsible for being avid stewards of the game. So if they are, and you watch and you look at what Illinois is now compared to what they were, when they played Duke in the Garden when they were banged up, it's a different team. And so they should be evaluated on, yes, their body of work, but also how they've been playing lately to some degree while they're whole, as long as they're going to be whole in the tournament. And they should be. So I think they can get to a 5 or 6.
So would they take into account knowing those injuries and illnesses and stuff like that? Would they take into account, I mean, that's the word that's been used so often with Illinois this season, that ceiling of being able to say,
Yeah.
like, this is one of, ceiling wise, this is one of the best teams in the country that can compete with the likes of, those who are up there at the 2 and 1 seed lines. And if they do take that into account, and also Merez Johnson coming back. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they tweeted out today he's going to be coming back for the Big Ten tournament. Are they going to take that into account and say, well, Merez Johnson wasn't with them and they were just winning these games before, so they're going to be even better? I mean, obviously you can't predict what's going on in their minds, but do you think that's worth a seed line or two?
The committee, I've heard some some of the committee members and the leads who've done some podcasts over the last couple of years. It is very rare for them to move a seed line based on an injury or player coming back. Very, very rare. Within a seed line, maybe a little bit more. I don't think it's enough to move them a seed line. I think it's enough that when they're debating this or that, it kind of creeps into people's mind. I don't think it's as formal as we had him as a 6, let's bump him to a 5. I think it's just kind of inherently in everybody's mind, and that may kind of subconsciously impact it a little bit. And I think they're going to get the benefit of the doubt in seeding because, again, they're one of those teams that they're mesmerizing when you watch them. You're like, this team, why, how do they ever lose? Right. And so I think that there's something about the eye test that works with them.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you're right. So right now, 10 line, you have Vanderbilt, Drake, Arkansas, Baylor. If I'm Illinois, I want no part of Drake. I want no part of that, style of play and everything.
Yep.
Just, go ahead and give them to like Ole Miss or Marquette or something, let them
Yeah.
let them deal with that. Do you think there's a chance they get Drake? You think there's a chance they get one of those others that are there at the 10 line? What are your thoughts?
Maybe. A team like Vanderbilt's kind of flying under the radar, right? There's so many good SEC schools, and Vandy's not traditionally a powerhouse in basketball. Okay, at times, but not a powerhouse. Um, eh, Billington's a fantastic coach. Wisconsin fans will realize, right? He coached James Madison last year when they beat Tom Izzo the first game of the season last year, and then they beat Wisconsin in the NCAA tournament. He can really coach. They can really score. They struggle defensively, but they can really score. They do not turn the ball over at all. And they're a very good offensive team. They're a top 25 offensive team. When you play teams that can score, right, puts a little bit of pressure on you, especially an Illinois team that at times can get a little bit stagnant when they don't shoot the ball from the perimeter. So Vandy's kind of sneaky good, in a bracket sense. Like you wouldn't, not a lot of people are going to take Vandy, but keep in mind, this is a team that's beaten Tennessee, Kentucky, Texas, Mississippi, A&M, Missouri. Like those are really good wins. Now, the majority of those are at home. They haven't been great on neutral in a way, but those are still some really, really talented players offensively that can do some damage.
I like this comment from Philip. He says a chance to beat AJ Hogarth sounds good. I, I had
Right?
almost forgot Hogarth went to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, he's been their lead. He's been good for them. He's not always, as everybody knows, he's not always the most efficient player, but he's good. He's a good player.
Yeah, it's kind of the reputation he got a little bit with Michigan State fans. Always
And
found that
props to Philip.
entertaining.
They did play Arkansas. That's why I stayed away from the Arkansas one and went with Vandy. There you go.
Do you think if beating Arkansas a second time, you think that would be difficult for him? I mean, is that a
They'll
team you think
they'll
they'd want to face? What are your thoughts?
they'll keep them away. So what the
Oh, okay.
committee will try to do is, if at all possible, they'll keep them away from a rematch. It's going to be very tricky seeding all of these SEC schools. But by and large, that they'll avoid a rematch in round one. They should be able to do that.
Okay. All right. Good. 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 John asked, "Do you think Byington would be better at a school with better resources than Vanderbilt? Think he might want to move up to another school at some point, or do you think maybe Vanderbilt's the place for him?"
Good question. He's got ties to that area, but that also means he's within an arm's length of Virginia. So, on some of the ACC podcasts and things I've joined, people ask about the Virginia job, and I always list him as someone that makes a lot of sense. Really, really good coach. He might be looking around the SEC and being like, this is really difficult. Someone's going to give me a lifeline to go play in a 3-bid ACC. That sounds a lot better right now than dealing with being a really good season. I finished 12th in the SEC. So I think he could be, yes, Philip, to your question, absolutely. He could be better with better resources, and he's a really good basketball coach. Maybe he might be a dark horse person for Virginia.
That's very, very interesting. All right. I don't imagine we'll spend too much time on this team, not even in the Big Ten tournament. I think, their season's probably over except for the crown at this point. But any
Yeah.
any comments on Nebraska? I mean, they had the fall from grace. They at one point ESPN had them 90% chance to make the NCAA tournament, and then they lose to Penn State. They go on to lose to Minnesota. They have that 2 overtime game with Ohio State that pretty much sealed everything, and then Iowa beats them this weekend. I mean, those losses to end the season really just kind of ended everything for Nebraska. Feel bad for them, but what's your, is there any possibility
No.
for them at all to make the tournament? Okay, no.
No, the NCAA committee cannot set a standard that they cannot set a standard that they can let in an at-large team. So a team selected, they did not make their conference tournament when 16
Yeah.
teams get in. They cannot set that principle. So with that being said, I mean, it on February 16th, they're 17-9. They're cruising. They're a 9 seed. So at that point, I mean, 9 seeds make the tournament at that stage, right? Their schedule had set up beautifully for them too, right? At Penn State, Michigan at home, Minnesota at home, at Ohio State, who struggled at home, and Iowa at home. So when you look at that, they just needed a couple home wins. They didn't even have to win at Penn State. They didn't even have to win at Ohio State. They really honestly just had to beat Minnesota and Iowa at home. That's it. And
Yeah.
they couldn't do it, right? They finished losing 5 straight. Obviously didn't make the Big Ten tournament. Really disheartening, because I think at times when you watch them play, Gary plays so hard. Bryce Williams is a fantastic college basketball player, and they probably deserved better. They didn't get the support around them. Hoiberg's a nice little player, but they didn't really get the support around them. But they were on track. Like you said, they were in the 85, 95 percentile for making the tournament. If you're 17-9 with the bubble that is weak as it is this year, and they just couldn't. Something happened in that Penn State loss where they lost their confidence, and the rest of the way they struggled. Keep in mind, last year they did not lose a game during the conference at home at Pinnacle Bank. I mean, that is traditionally a very tough place to play, very kind of quietly a very tough place to play. And this year they really struggled there, especially late in the season, which was really, really surprising, especially with a couple of players that are going to be up there on the all conference boards.
Yeah, they were 10-6 at home this year. I was on a Iowa radio show, and they were asking me like, what happened to this team? And I said, honestly, they didn't win at home this year.
Yeah.
10-6 at home, it's not going to do it if you're Nebraska. You have to take advantage of your home games, and they weren't able to do it this season for whatever reason. And I think you're right. I think it would have been different if they had Rank Mast this year.
Yes.
Losing him was huge for them.
Yep.
So. All right, let's move on. Oh, I guess I do want to ask: have you been paying attention to Crown bracketology or anything like that? I know Crown and NIT has gotten a little crazy this year, but any thoughts there for Nebraska or anything?
Yeah, I look at it a little bit, but there's quite a bit to handle here trying to figure out 68 in the NCAA tournament. I've looked at a little bit. I mean, the math would say, to be very honest, Ohio State is going to have a hard time staying in the bracket just with bid thieves coming its way. We'll talk about Ohio State in a minute. Nebraska is probably the selection there for the Crown. Ohio State, Nebraska would probably, if Ohio State doesn't make it, be the first 2 picks. And then from there, yeah, maybe like a Penn State school. Or I could see even a conversation about USC, who at times has been pretty skilled with some big wins this year.
Yeah. I was looking at something earlier today, and they were saying Nebraska probably a 1 seed in the Crown, and if Ohio State doesn't make the NCAA tournament, they're probably there as well, and probably 2 teams from the Big Ten not making the Crown. I mean, you're picking from essentially 3 conferences to go to a 16 team bracket there. So Nebraska fans,
I don't
probably a 1 seed in the Crown.
Yeah, probably a really good seed in the Crown. A team that'd be really, really enjoyable to watch. I think they're going to be a handful in the Big Ten tournament is Rutgers. But, I don't know if Bailey and Harper are going to lace it up in the Crown, right? They may shut it down. I have no idea, no inside information regarding that. And Rutgers is wildly entertaining, and at times they can be dominant. But, I don't know if those players would be comfortable playing when there wasn't a path to the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, there was something I read the other day that said Rutgers would, not go to the Crown, but then I read something else the other day that said, they're contractually obligated because they play in the Big Ten, and the Big Ten, has Fox, and so they said like worst case scenario here would be that the Crown would put Rutgers in, and then Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey would just say, yeah, we're not playing, and then you'd be left with a Rutgers team that doesn't have their 2 lottery picks on it, and that wouldn't be very fun to see. So, all right, let's move on to Oregon. Oregon, you have them as one of the teams on the 4 seed line. They struggled there for a good amount of the Big Ten conference, and then they come back now, one of 7 games straight. Really, the only high team, big team in there that they beat was Wisconsin, and that is a good win for them. However, Wisconsin maybe not looking, as good in other people's eyes after that Penn State loss. What's your thoughts here with the seed line for Oregon? Solid 4, you think could go up, could go down? What are you thinking?
I think their ceiling's probably at the 4. I don't think they really have a path to a 3. They kind of took on at one point. They lost 6 out of 7. Right, they're really struggling in the middle of the Big Ten season. They probably maxed at a 4. There's probably a good chance they're one of those teams that kind of slides back to a 5. If, let's say Indiana gets them in the 8-9 game, they probably settle back into the 5. What's been really good about Oregon is, Dane Altman is a phenomenal basketball coach. So that comes in handy. I think you've seen some teams that have excelled in late game situations, and some teams in the Big Ten have really struggled. And it's not a coincidence. Like, it's not a coincidence to win a lot of late close games. Shilstead is one of the most dynamic guards, and he can take 38 minutes off, and then the last 2 minutes, he's an All-American, and he's hit some major dagger threes for the Ducks this year. He's kept them and won them in games late to give them a lot of confidence. Even just down the stretch, the win at Wisconsin was overtime, and of course Washington was overtime as well. A lot of really, really close games. The Iowa game was close as well. So they have a they hit shots late. Altman's really good. Also keep in mind at Oregon for your bracket, Altman has never lost a game in the first round of the NCAA tournament. He's 8-0. So just something to keep in mind as you're filling out brackets. He's a phenomenal basketball coach. He's a great mind. And even if they settle in at the 5 line, they could do some damage because the guards are really good.
Yeah, I've been reminding people that Oregon last year wasn't going to make the NCAA
Yeah.
tournament most likely, and then they go to the Pac-12 tournament and win it there. So Dana Altman he finds a way here in March, and his team will most likely do the same then. Now, if they are a 5 seed, I got to be honest, I don't like being a 5 seed if I'm a team, because you are kind of playing that top tier of mid-major teams or smaller teams. I mean, you got VCU's, UC San Diego, McNeese, Yale on the 12 seed line. I mean, these are teams that could be pretty dangerous on that 12 seed line there. Are there any teams that Oregon should be on the lookout for? Like, we really don't want to play that one.
Yeah, Yale will drive them crazy. Yale shoots almost 40% from 3. They're a top 15 team in the country at shooting threes. So Yale's really, really skilled offensively and kind of sneaky good enough defensively, especially for an Ivy League school. A couple of years ago, Princeton took care of the ball, made a bunch of threes against a good Missouri team, and they got all the way to a Sweet 16. So I would say Yale is a tough matchup for Oregon because they're going to spread you out, and they're going to take all of that athleticism and dynamic ability that Oregon has and kind of slow the tempo, kind of calm things down, spread you out, and really shoot the ball from the perimeter really well. So that'd be a really interesting matchup.
Yeah, yeah. What's the size of Yale look like if they do get them? Because obviously Nate Biddle down there, that would be pretty big advantage for them, I would think.
Yeah, Yale is sneaky athletic and good. They're in the top 60 offensive rebounding in the country, and they're 35th defensive rebounding. So like they can really rebound the ball. And so it's kind of one and done. When you're in the top 40 or 50 and you're an Ivy League school and rebounding, like you're really good. And Yale is. Now Yale still has some work to do to get there to the tournament. So it's not automatic. They got to get through the semifinals and finals of the Ivy League tournament. But if they make it there, they're really entertaining watch. A lot of these Ivy League schools, they're so skilled. They don't turn the ball over. They're so intelligent at what they do. They run a lot of really good sets. And they can traditionally Ivy League schools can really shoot, and they follow that model.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. All right, we'll move on to another team I'm really high on with their ceiling, which is Maryland. Maryland this
Yeah.
season, the Crab Five, everything else we've talked about that. Very interesting team. Really don't get much bench help, but Kevin Willard has done a really good job of putting together a starting lineup, and that starting lineup has carried them to second place in the Big Ten this season. Maryland, I think, is one of those teams to look out for to possibly be able to win the Big Ten. They're going to have a really tough, they're really tough time there on the lower part of the bracket facing Purdue if Purdue moves on to play them. But Maryland could make some noise in the Big Ten tournament. I do wonder if that would affect their chances in the NCAA tournament. But you have Maryland as a 4 seed
Yep.
right now. What are your thoughts? Stay at the 4, higher, lower? What do you think?
I think they're probably maxing at 4. Listen, if they get all the way to Sunday, there's maybe an outside chance at a the bottom of the 3 line. But there's so much traffic up there. I think the last 3 line, they might be able to get ahead of an Iowa State team. Like maybe the last 3, so a possibility, but probably settle in at the 4, maybe the top of the 5. So it's somewhere between 3 and 5 for Maryland. I've said all year, I think Maryland has the highest ceiling of any team in the Big Ten. I think they're the most dynamic. I think when you kind of wrap it all together, they've got a balance of experience. They got youth, they got talent, they got some NBA prospects. They're really good. Willard thought, and I've been at the last couple Big Ten media days to start the year. I think Willard thought he had a really good team last year, and he was incredibly disappointed. They didn't play very well. They didn't play very hard. They didn't play very well. And I think you can feel that passion come through this year. Now, what hurts Maryland in terms of seeding is, and why they're not going to get the benefit of the doubt is they're 326th in the country in strength of schedule non-conference. So that you talk, JR, you talk about kind of bumping up and down seed lines. That bumps you down a seed line,
Mm.
or at least half of, one or two spots where you look at it and say they didn't do anything in the non-conference. I mean, nothing, because they didn't even give themselves a chance to. And the committee historically, if you're over 250, but especially in the 300s in terms of non-conference strength of schedule, the committee will find you and they will bump you down, because they will say, listen, it's all of our responsibility to make this sport relevant in November and December. You didn't do your part. That's what it comes down to. You did not try to schedule. You can control that. You can't always control your Big Ten schedule anymore, right? With it so large, but your non-conference, you can at least try. The intent has to be there, and they didn't do it at all. So that's why I'm a little bit nervous about them holding on to a 4, and that's why I think they'll struggle to get to a 3. So I would say the last 2 spots on the 4, maybe the first 5 is where they'll end up.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because we were talking a lot about Maryland, kind of as Big Ten season started, and we didn't know what to do with them because we were like, okay, they're winning games, but they're also not winning against anybody. So what do we
Yes,
do with this team? And then Maryland, they wanted to be ranked so bad, and they were upset that teams with 3, 4 losses were ranked above them, and it's like, well, you didn't play anybody.
that's
So
right.
yeah, that schedule doesn't just come to hurt you in the AP poll, but it comes back to hurt you in the NCAA tournament as well. Okay. Tell you what, let's hit a break really fast. We're going to hear from our partners at CBB Analytics, and then we'll come back and we will talk about Ohio State. So everybody stick with us. We'll be right back to talk about Ohio State. CBB Analytics isn't just another stat site, it's your ultimate destination for in depth college basketball analysis used by fans and even the coaches. It has comprehensive stats for men's and women's basketball across Division 1 through 3, dating all the way back to 2018. From shooting percentage to game recap, CBB Analytics has it all. Try CBB Analytics for free or pay for a tier to take your basketball knowledge to the next level. Back here on the Big Ten Huddle, we appreciate you being with us. Please do like, subscribe, helps out the channel and everything else. We do have our football channel that does very well, and we have our basketball channel too that trying to grow, trying to get up there a little bit more. So please do like, subscribe, help us out. Okay, Jason, Ohio State. Ohio State, they lost that game to Indiana. That really hurt them. I thought Indiana could have survived losing that one, but it being at home, it was going to be unlikely as well, in my opinion. But you still have Ohio State on there. They are an 11 seed. Are they possibly going to make it, or do you think this is classic bid Steelers going to come in and take it away?
I think them being in the tournament field right now is a bit of fool's gold. Listen, I love if they would make the tournament. That'd be awesome. But the reality is this: if they won on Saturday at Indiana, they would have been a lock for the tournament. That would have been their 7th quad 1 wins. And when you look around the bubble around them, Xavier right now has 1, and North Carolina is 1-11. So there's not the quantity anything close to 7 that they would have had. But here's the deal: the NCAA committee has been very, very straightforward in a sense of, we talked about the split last time. They want you to be 4 games or more over 500 to make the tournament. That's not a rule. It's an unwritten piece that historically that's what they've done, and they've penalized teams that have fell under the threshold of 4 games over 500. So how do you get there, right? Ohio State's going to have to win 2 games in the Big Ten tournament. That means you got to beat Iowa, you got to take care of business. Doesn't have to be pretty. You just got to win by a point. And then you got to play a really good game against a really good Illinois team and win. Those 2 still may not get them in because they're still kind of be on the pecking order of an Indiana. I thought if they beat Indiana, Indiana would have been out, and I think Indiana would have had a really hard time getting in. It was truly a cage match, and it was truly an elimination game in a lot of ways, and that's why it was so critical for Indiana. It's hard for Ohio State to leapfrog Indiana because they beat them twice, right? So it's hard. Now, head-to-head's not that big of a deal in college basketball because there's 31, 32 games. At that point, 35 after the conference tournaments. But that's enough that when they're that close, it really, really hurt them. Ohio State was banged up, right? They didn't have Royal the first time they played Indiana, but those aren't big enough to swing a seed. So here's where they are. They're better than the bubble teams around them. Crazy things would have to happen for Boise, Colorado State, and all that to happen. If you're an Ohio State fan, let's keep it really, really simple. You have to hope that chalk wins out. You have to hope that teams that are the 1 seed in the conference tournaments win out. Teams like Memphis have to win. The American Athletic Conference only has, it's a one bid league right now, and that's Memphis, and that's it. So if Memphis gets beat and another team, let's say UAB or someone like that, takes a bid, then that's going to knock out an at-large school team. And right now, that's either Xavier or Ohio State. And speaking of Xavier, if you're an Ohio State fan, on Thursday afternoon, Xavier plays Marquette. And even though Xavier is only 1-8 in quad one games, the rest of the resume is pretty good. If Xavier beats Marquette, that probably would move them ahead of Ohio State. Then then you're the last team in. So the Xavier Marquette game, you really want to root for Marquette to beat Xavier and keep them out of the tournament as well. It's going to come down to bid thieves. How many teams steal bids. That's really going to determine Ohio State's fate, which is crazy. There's not a lot of teams that can catch them. Usually at this stage, when I'm putting out brackets every day, there's usually a pod of 10 to 12 teams that can realistically still make the tournament. Right now, I would say they're maybe behind Ohio State, realistically, 3 or 4 that can make it, right? Boise, maybe Colorado State, maybe UNC, but I doubt it. Maybe UC Irvine. Like, that's about it. If Dayton got hot and made the A10 finals, like, possibly. There's just not that many teams that can pass Ohio State. So again, it's all predicated on our team's gonna steal some bids. Traditionally, the math says 2.5 bids are stolen a year. Last year there was 5. If there's more than 2, Ohio State's path to the tournament is almost non-existent. Even if they beat Illinois, it's going to be really tough. If it stays around 0 or 1, and even if they beat Iowa, they still might get in. Depends on the Mountain West schools. So the best thing they can do realistically is beat Iowa, beat Illinois, hope for some help, and that might be enough.
Yeah, you never want to rely on chalk in March. That sounds like a losing
formula. Yeah, right. Yeah.
I did want to ask you. So Thursday, San Diego State plays Boise State in the Mountain West Conference tournament. There, do you think Ohio State has a rooting interest there, or is Boise State so close? Or you think? I mean, what are your thoughts here?
As someone that has a degree from Ohio State, I've looked at that about 12 different times. I think San Diego State's ahead of them in the pecking order. And I think San Diego State is probably going to get the benefit of the doubt because their record is just fundamentally better and they beat Houston. Listen, I think if they played on a neutral court, Ohio State would probably beat San Diego State, but San Diego State's 20-8. And, and their non-conference strength of schedule is 7 and they beat Houston. And while they don't have much else behind that, they're not going to put a 15-loss Ohio State team ahead of a 20-9 San Diego State team who did have that, who scheduled hard and did beat Houston. So I think in that case, you root for San Diego State to win that game, keep Boise at an arm's length. And then you need either San Diego State, New Mexico, or Utah State, all probably going to make it. I'm a little more bubbly on Utah State than most people, but I think you want New Mexico or San Diego State to win the Mountain West. You don't want Colorado State or Boise State making a run.
Another game to possibly look at, Oklahoma and Georgia there. I would think Ohio State fans probably rooting for Georgia in that scenario on Wednesday night, correct?
Correct. I think that, listen, a lot of the narrative with Oklahoma was they're leaking oil and they're going to finish with 3 wins in the SEC, da-da-da-da-da. Well, they won their last 3. They got 6 wins in the SEC. And I know 6-12 is a ridiculous schedule to have a conversation about for a team in a conference, in a major conference. But the reality is this, the conference record is not a statistical item of information on the team sheet for the NCAA tournament committee. It doesn't exist in terms of that. They can find it. It's on lots of other things. It's on Google. Like, you can find it. But the reality is it doesn't exist on the team sheet. Therefore, it's not a measuring metric. So because of that, now you're dealing with an Oklahoma team, again, that was 13-0 in the non-conference. And, I'm going to rattle off some of their wins, Oklahoma. I mean, they beat Arizona on a neutral court, Louisville on a neutral court, at Arkansas. That was Missouri, Michigan, Texas, Mississippi State, and Vanderbilt. Like, they're going to make tournament.
Yeah.
Like, you unless some crazy 5 bid steals happen, Oklahoma is ahead of Ohio State. Again, they're over that threshold. And I think Oklahoma's going to make it. I think they're more comfortable than what most people realize because of the way they finished the season. And they don't have a lot of bad losses. They lost at home to LSU, but they have 6 or 7 wins over tournament teams. team like Carolina, has one, right? Xavier has three. I don't think they're going to get past.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is kind of maybe a little bit of a weirder question for you, but I thought of it, and I think it would be interesting to try and figure out. Ohio State this season, they lost a number of games in the out of conference, some of them by more, some of them a little bit closer. Are there any losses in that out of conference that stick out to you? Like if they could have just
It's
won maybe
Pitt.
that one game.
It's
Okay, that's what
Pitt.
I was thinking. I think it
I
was
mean,
Pitt. Yeah,
the Pitt loss was inexcusable. They fouled a
yeah,
3-point shooter twice in the last couple minutes, the last minute or so of the game. I thought at the time, I know this is ridiculous, and seems like hindsight. I said at the time that's going to keep them out of the tournament, and
wow,
because you can just when you do this for a stretch of time, you realize that certain losses then become very prevalent down the stretch. Pitt tanked. I thought Pitt had a really good roster. They have good guards. They could be a dark horse in the ACC tournament. But that game, they were chasing that game the rest of the season. It's that listen, they led the entire Oregon game and got beat. Shilstead hit a three, copy and paste that 4 times for Oregon this year, and then they didn't show up against Northwestern, which was, I mean, I don't necessarily know that happened. They had to be sick or something had to be going on that game because there's no way Northwestern comes there and beats them by 20 at home. But it's the Pitt game. It will always be the Pitt game, 91-90 in overtime, where they had, statistically, they were in the 95, 96% chance of winning 3 or 4 different times in both regulation and overtime, and they didn't close the deal. And listen, we got to call it what it is. There have been major growing pains with Diebler down the stretch in games. I mean, this is a tournament team roster. This team
yeah.
should be good enough to make the NCAA tournament. They've showed up big in some big games, but their best wins, yes, they were kind of dogged at Purdue. But if you watch this team, you had a 16, 18 point lead against USC on the road, and you just watch it evaporate, and the game's tied at 80 with 40 seconds to go. Against Illinois at Illinois, they have a 12-point lead with 12 minutes to go. At Indiana, they're up 10 with 10 minutes to go. There is a complete lack of execution down the stretch, which should not be happening when your point guard is as experienced as Thornton is. But they really have struggled down the stretch. Part of it is late in games, and they're one of the highest fouling teams in the country. They don't guard without fouling, and they get into double bonus, kill them in the back end of these halves, especially in the second half. And they've gotten past, especially at the free throw line, Wisconsin game, a lot of those types of games. They're so close to being a lock. I mean, Ohio State is 5. Listen, a lot of teams can say this, but Ohio State is legitimately 5 possessions away from wearing a white jersey, a home jersey in the NCAA tournament. And they're likely going to be left out because of Pitt thieves. But to be more succinct, it was the Pitt game. That was the
Yeah.
game they had to have.
Would you say in the conference then the Northwestern game just because of the amount they lost by and stuff like that? Do you think that was probably maybe the biggest conference game loss?
Yeah, that one really hurt. Listen, Michigan at the time was playing really well, so you get beat, you get beat. Oregon game was tough because they led the entire way. I mean, they
Yeah.
led the entire game up until about 30 seconds to go. But yeah, the Northwestern game, when you look back, the games you need to win, you need to win certain home games, and that just didn't take place. Ohio State, over the last 5 or 6 years, has really struggled at holding serve at home, and some of that's the environment. And the arena and the environment just isn't giving them the kind of the dominant, the dominant home court advantage that you hope they'd have. Let's keep in mind, if we name Northwestern, you have to name the Indiana game where they had the ball and a chance to win multiple times. Devin Royal did not play, got it, but you still needed to win. And that was an Indiana team at the time. Again, that's mid-January. That was when Woodson, the game before, right, when Indiana played Iowa at home, I believe, or I think it was Illinois, I'm sorry. They were run out of the gym by 30, 35, and they were chanting fire Woodson, all those things. And then Indiana came to the Schottenstein Center, right? Value State Arena, and they looked around, they're like, this is quiet. Like, we're fine. No one's yelling at us. We're just take care of business. And that changed Indiana's season. And ultimately, that win kept Ohio State out as well.
That's crazy. Crazy. All right, last question about Ohio State, and then we'll move on. I know
Mm-hmm.
this is more just my curiosity as an Ohio
Sure.
State fan, and I know you're a Ohio State grad. You think Diebler's the guy? What are your thoughts on Diebler?
I think he's a really good human being. I think he's actually a really good basketball coach. I think he's one of those. He's a teacher. He's a mentor. He comes from a basketball family. He has all the parts and pieces. Good recruiter too, to make you a really good coach. Young, energetic, all those things. He needs some success early in his career. If he can just kind of get his feet on the ground, he could be at Ohio State a really, really long time.
Mhm.
I believe that. But part of getting your feet on the ground is making the darn tournament.
Yeah.
And I think what this would have done, and still could do, would take the monkey off of his back, give him some breathing room, probably keep Thornton. They may not be able to keep these guys now, right? If I'm Royal and Thornton, I'm like, why am I coming back again? Like, I'm going to go somewhere where I know I'm going to make the tournament and I'm going to make similar type money. I think it's going to be hard to keep them if they don't make the tournament. Roster retention's tough when you miss the NCAA tournament 3-4 years in a row. I think he can do it. But listen, you watch these games, they don't get calls late, right? I mean, he's
Yeah.
going against some people who have been doing this a really, really long time. They've struggled at the end in in-game situations. I think he can be. I need to give you a better answer. I think he can be. He's going to get at least 2 more years to make the tournament and make a run. I think if he can get one just decent run, even a win in the tournament, and that takes the monkey off of his back, I think he'd be a really good coach a long time. He's gonna go, if he's not at Ohio State, he's gonna go somewhere and be a really good basketball coach for a long, long time because he gets it. He comes from, like I said, he comes from a family, they understand basketball, and he's a really good basketball mind and a great guy. He's been the catalyst for some really good recruiting boons. It's whether they can apply it and finish strong this year and get in the tournament, though.
Yeah, I kind of feel like about Jake Diebler similar to how I feel a little bit about Ben Johnson, which is if he goes someplace else. I know not this season, obviously, like you said, probably 2 more years, if things keep going the way they are. But if he goes someplace else, he's probably going to have success at a smaller college doing something,
Yeah,
and then you never know. Like you might never get him back again, and he could have a really good career. Just unfortunate for the timing that it is, and it's his very first coaching job,
that's
and
right.
it's at a program that the fans are hurting right now, right? Like the
That's
fans saw
right.
the success under Thad Matta. Now they're upset because Chris Holtman, flamed out, and they're itching for success. And unfortunately, in the Big Ten, it's really really difficult for a first time not just first time at the school,
That's right.
first time head coach to have success in the conference.
That's right. I mean, if you run down some of their losses, right? 7, name one, right? Like, I'm going through it, 70, 68, like all these one possession losses. There's been immense growing pains for Ohio State this year. And you might get the benefit of it out for 1 year. You don't get it at schools like that for 2 years. Ask Holtman, right? And
Yeah,
keep in mind, Chris Holtman had a 2 seed during the pandemic, right? He had EJ Liddell at a 2 seed. He ran into Oral Roberts at the 15 line, which they should have never been a 15, but that's neither here nor there. But the grace period isn't that long at these big schools with lots of resources poured in. I will say this: if Ohio State wants to improve their basketball program, part of what they also need to do is they need to change the environment. It does not. Listen, Oregon felt this a little bit this year. Those environments were not as imposing as some of these other schools, and even going to Nebraska is hard, but going to Ohio State right now is not difficult.
yeah,
Then that's not because they're not playing hard and not because people aren't trying. It's because the environment is 18 or 20,000 seats. And even Ohio State, when they draw 13, 14,000, which is a great draw on a Wednesday night, it's hard to fill the place. And it's just not as intimidating. And so the environment also is impeding Ohio State's path to being a great basketball program. Listen, there aren't 7,000 empty seats when you play Illinois. They're not 7,000 empty seats when you play Purdue. And some of that is the arena is not right size for Ohio State, and it's really hurting them.
yeah. Yeah, they made that arena for concerts and entertainment and stuff like that. And unfortunately, Ohio State has to play in it. It's just not good for them. So,
Yep.
all right. A lot of Ohio State talk there. Thanks for sticking with us. If you did, we are going to head on up north to Michigan. We're going to end with two rivalries here, Ohio State, Michigan, and then we'll get into Indiana and Purdue. Michigan right now, Jason, there was talk about a 3 seed, possibly a
Yeah.
2 seed if Michigan kept playing well. And then they just. They kind of fell off the map. That Illinois loss really just kind of hurt them. I mean, I think it started with the Nebraska game. They did end up, I
Yeah.
think you were on right after that game with me.
Yeah.
And I was impressed that they were able to win that one kind of gritty, but overall, the play never improved. They kind of kept playing that same way. Obviously, scored more. They didn't keep scoring, in the 40s, but still, the play didn't improve all that much, and that's how you lose big to Michigan State and lose big to Illinois. And it doesn't look great for them right now. They're going to get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament, so they're going to have some extra time to try and figure it out. But right now, you have them as a 5 seed. You feel good about that 5 seed? You feel like they might be closer to a 6 seed? What are your thoughts here?
I think they'll probably end up on the 6th line. But listen, I mean, part of the reason why they didn't finish the season well is they played Illinois, Maryland, and Michigan State. Right? Those teams are good, and we, the issue with Michigan is inherently there is so much pressure on them to shoot the ball really well because they turn the ball over so much, 336 in the country in turnover percentage. They've got to shoot the ball around the 50, around 50% or so to beat a good team, probably over 50% to beat really good teams. And that's hard to do. It's hard to make a Final Four when you turn the ball over that much. It really is. And so they're going to be a team that they're going to have a decent seed, but they are like the prototype to get upset in the tournament, because when you give away possessions and when teams get turnovers and get out in transition, you get the crowd behind them in these Cinderella games. That's the recipe on being a 5-12 upset. Is you don't take care of the ball, and a team that is completely reliant on shooting the ball has a cold night, and you get beat.
So do you think Michigan might be better served for a 6 seed? Because I'm looking at some of these 11 seeds, and they're teams that Michigan have played in the Big Ten this year and beat Ohio State, Indiana. Like, these are like opponents. I mean, obviously they're not exactly the same, but if I'm Michigan, I'm looking at Yale and I want no part of that. Philip's been wanting the Yale matchup there, but if I'm them, I want no part of Yale. I want no part of McNeese. Like, I don't want any of them. Give me Xavier, give me Utah State, give me Oklahoma. I think that could be possibly a better matchup for him.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, JRT, the percentages are really close to 5-12 games versus 6-11 games. 6-11 games, they run about the 11 seed wins about 40% of the time, and the 5-12 is just slightly less than that. So it's not a big percentage play one way or the other. It just ultimately comes into matchups, and if Michigan's kind of ready to go. Michigan's always going to struggle with a team like Michigan State that's built for just defense, right? They're just going to pound you. They're going to take the ball away there, and then they're going to squeeze the times out of the possessions. So, yeah, I mean, it depends on the fundamental matchup for Michigan. At times, they can against a team that's kind of small, they can bully them a little bit, right, with their bigs. Wolf and Golden are really, really skilled inside. Hey, listen, they've had a wonderful season. Right, they're really well coached. They've had a wonderful season, but their guards are dynamic and kind of careless at times with the ball. If that gets fixed, the Elite Eight, sure, but chances are they're going to struggle in one of the games in the first couple rounds of the NCAA tournament and get beat.
Yeah, and Philip's exactly right here. He says we're Wolf versus old school. That would be
Yeah.
that'd be one heck of an upset if that
Yep.
happened. Not rooting for it to happen. Okay, I'm an Ohio State fan, but it would be pretty crazy there. Anything else on Michigan before we move on to Indiana?
No, we're sounding really hard on them. They've had a wonderful season. If you're in the mix for a 5 or 6 seed, you had a great year.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
There's a lot of traffic at those lines. Some really, really good teams. And it's not that they can't do it. They can. Listen, Gale's been a really good player late in the season for Ohio State in the first couple of years of his career. If they catch lightning in a bottle with him, he changes the math on their ceiling, and they can absolutely make a run. But when you watch Michigan, you got to keep an eye on the turnovers. When those turnovers, if you're a Michigan fan, but when you get near that 20 turnover mark, something like that, then the alarm starts going off, and it's really hard to win. If you give away the ball 16 to 20 times in a game, your winning percentage drops a ton. So that's what you've got to be careful about. When they keep the turnovers to 10 to 12, they usually run away with games. They're so skilled offensively.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Michigan at one point, I think they were in the bottom three of Power Four high major conferences teams in turnovers per game. So they
Yes.
had the most. And at that time, they were also in first place in the Big Ten. I was like, how does the Big Ten letting this happen?
Well,
This is this is
they were
incredible.
winning a lot of close games, and part of that
Yeah.
is, they're really, really well coached. Like I said, if Dusty May can take Florida Atlantic to a Final Four, then he's a phenomenal basketball coach. And I think he'll recalibrate his roster next season to have a little bit more care with the ball. But this is where we are now. And I mean, with that said, they win a ton of close games, and at some point it's hard to win them all. I think they had won like 11 straight one possession games this season, up until recently, and that's a trend that's very, very tough.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move on to Indiana. Indiana gets the big win over Ohio State. They're almost certainly a lock at this point, in my opinion. Last time I checked, they didn't have any quad two losses. This is a team that I think they have four quad one wins, but all of their losses have been quad one. So this is a team that doesn't have any bad losses on their schedule or anything like that. They managed to beat Ohio State late there. Mike Woodson really seems to be leaning in who he is as a coach with everything that's going on, and his time at Indiana coming to an end. Very emotional after getting that win on Senior Day. It was kind of cool to see that, even as somebody who was upset by seeing Ohio State lose. I was feeling happy for Mike Woodson and him being able to walk away with a little bit better taste in his mouth there. Indiana, 11 seed lock. You think they could get up to the 10 seed? What's your thoughts?
There's probably a path to the 10 line. Baylor has a very thin resume. So, I think Baylor's spot could flip between a 10 and 11, depending on how Vandy shakes out as well. Um, Indiana, I mean, they had a season where they just kind of didn't do anything stupid, right? They just kind of hung in there. They beat all the teams that they should beat. They swept Ohio State, and then they won. They hung their hat on the win at Michigan State, which kind of jump started their season for the second time. They came back from being down 12 or so at halftime against Purdue at home. They have a home court environment, right? They once Woodson resigned and the anger was out of the fans, they could just appreciate their team. Assembly Hall is a very tough place to play, and they started to really play much better at home. They're not real skilled offensively, right? At times they struggle from the perimeter. They caught some big baskets late against Ohio State and such, but they're 250 in the country in shooting the 3-point ball. So at times they can be kind of methodical. They've got some pretty good size. Keep in mind, I mean, Ballo was one of the better players in the country the last couple of years at Arizona. They haven't really figured out a way to properly utilize him through consistently. At times you're like, wow, he's really skilled. Why don't they give him the ball more? And then at times he's lost out there. So they haven't really gelled that much, but it was good enough. And like you said, to make the tournament this year, they don't have any losses outside quad one, right? And in quad one, they're 4-12. The rest of the way, though, they're 5-0, 6-0, and 4-0. Their non-conference strength of schedule is 160. That's what Ohio State should have been instead of 41. So they were able to acquire just enough wins to be above the 4-game threshold, and the Michigan State win obviously put them over the top. I don't know that that they can get 10 would be best case scenario. Missing the tournament is worst case scenario. They're very likely in, but they are not a lock. If we get in the 4 to 5 bid steals range and they lose to Oregon in the opening round for them of the Big Ten tournament, there's a possibility they could still get left out. I think celebrations are good and fun, and I think obviously they've had a good season, not great but good, but they're not in quite yet, because I think that their resume is still a little bit thin in terms of quality wins. They're likely in, they're probably in, but they're not in quite yet.
So you think they're safe even if there's like 4 or 5 bid stealers this year?
There's probably, if it gets to 5, that's probably their tipping point, right?
Hmm.
Like last year, St. John's and Seton Hall, heck, even Providence, 3 Big East teams were like just inside the cut line. And when 5 schools were taken out, they were, 3 Big East teams were taken out. This year I've got them about the 5th or 6th team in, so they can absorb some of that, but a loss to Oregon and maybe another team makes a run, then you're the 3rd. So So I think anything past three bid stealers and Indiana fans are going to be on high alert.
A win against Oregon in Big Ten tournament, would it help? Would it do anything you
Oh
think?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
that would go quite a bit. Again, even you don't get full credit for those wins, but that would be really really helpful. I think a win against Oregon probably locks them. Um, I'm not one of those people that like, oh, you won your first game of the conference tournament, so you're for sure in or out. Like it again, the committee doesn't work that way because there's already 31 data points prior to that game, so this is just one of now 32 data points.
Yeah.
But for them, it would really really get them just a bump a little bit up, and that one little bump would probably be enough to keep them safe.
Very cool. All right. Good news for Indiana fans. Let's see. I did have something. Oh, Philip, he's been stomping this one. He says Indiana makes the round of 32 and Winston gets a contract extension. I don't know about the contract extension, but I mean, if Indiana gets the right matchup against, one of these, what's seed would that be? That would be a 7 seed. I mean, you're looking at Ole Miss, Illinois, Missouri, Marquette. Of course, they're not going to play Illinois, any of those 7 seeds that you would say, Indiana kind of looking good there?
Marquette has really struggled since the calendars changed to 2025. Cam Jones hasn't been quite as good. He's a fantastic college basketball player. They haven't been quite as good, especially on the defensive end, and they haven't created the turnovers as much. And we know Indiana at times can struggle to take care of the ball. Um, I'd say there's absolutely a path to beating Marquette. Missouri is tough and physical, can shoot the ball from the perimeter a little bit. They're almost too reliant at times, Missouri, from the three ball. I think Indiana can absolutely hang in there with those. And as hard as everybody is on Woodson, he's out coached some other Big Ten teams, in over the last couple months and done a pretty good job getting them in the tournament down the stretch.
Took down Izzo, took down Painter, two of the
Yeah.
best coaches in the conference. So,
Yep.
all right, good stuff there on Indiana. Our last team, the Purdue Boilermakers. Purdue, they lost, what is it, 6 of their last 8, I think it's been. So it's been a
Yep.
tough end of the season for Purdue. At one point, we were talking about Purdue was going to win the conference, and now they're not even getting a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. I think that speaks more to just how tough the conference is rather than Purdue is in some major trouble or something like that. But I mean, at the same time, nobody wants to lose 6 of their last 8. So Purdue loses to Indiana. Purdue does find themselves in a situation here where you have them at a 4 seed line. At one point, they were up to a 2 seed. You think that 4 seed is kind of more likely where they're going to be? Can they get to a 3 seed, or are you looking more at a 5 seed?
I think they're probably in the 4 or 5 range. They've really struggled in the back half of the year with the defensively. Their metrics defensively are really really poor since conference play started. I mean, it is almost unheard of that a Matt Painter team, they're in conference play only. They are dead last in the conference in 2 point field goal percentage defense, like dead last. Um, and with the skill and talent that they have, they just haven't been able to execute defensively. Some of that is because they trade defense for offense, right? They do. They know they do. But the other part is that I don't think anybody realized how helpful Zach Edey was on the defensive end. I think that was a bit. I think that was a bit of an underrated aspect of Edey's game and career at Purdue. The fact that while he wasn't this dominant presence on the defensive end, he was skilled enough and big enough to alter shots and be a presence in there to drive teams away and make them shoot the ball a little bit further away from the basket from the perimeter. And they haven't had that at all this year. Again, they were hanging in there defensively in the non-conference, and then teams really started to attack the rim on them to shoot high percentages, and that's why they've struggled. It's been the defensive end where they've struggled a lot. But with all that said, they've got a couple fantastic players, right? I mean, Ren, and they absolutely have the ability to make a run. He's one of the best coaches in the country. If you haven't watched Braden Smith much this year, he is a generationally good passer. I mean, he's just a wonderful college point guard. So between Ren and Smith, and if Lawyer gets hot, sometimes I think Lawyer has got to help more on the defensive end. I think he focuses too much on the offensive end. But if those guys get going, they absolutely can do some damage because they're going to have a better coach than just about everybody they go against. And that'll help them in the tournament. They're one of those teams that is going to absolutely benefit from getting out of the conference. I think Michigan's in that state right now where teams have kind of figured out Michigan, right? How to guard them. I think Purdue's there,
Yeah.
and that it and they're going to surprise people with some of their offensive skill sets when they get out of the conference. And so a breath of fresh air for them will go a long way.
That's really interesting. We've had a lot of discussion about what teams in the Big Ten are Final Four caliber. I've settled in with probably about four, teetering on maybe five teams that I think have the capability. I'm not predicting them to be there, but have the capability to be Final Four. And kind of my analysis on Purdue has been they have Final Four caliber players. They have a Final Four caliber coach, but
Yep.
then they also have role players that I don't think they are Final Four caliber. So can they do enough to overcome maybe some role players that haven't been good enough? Maybe they improve. We'll see, but haven't been good enough this season and get to an Elite Eight, a Final Four type of deal. I would guess no, but what are your thoughts on Final Four caliber for Purdue?
Yeah, I think they can. Philip mentioned the chat. He's exactly right. They're not very deep. Purdue's not very deep, so they're not going to benefit from playing, 4 games in a row. Philip, that's a really good point. They're probably not going to have any benefit in NCAA tournament if they have to play 4 games in a row in the Big Ten tournament. But yeah, they can make a Final Four. Listen, traditionally, March is about guard play. And they got guards, right? Smith's fantastic. He's one of the best point guards in the country, if not the best point guard in the country. And so, with all that said, if they take care of the ball, which they will, and they're going to be tougher matchups for teams that aren't accustomed to the way they play. We saw that when they went out to San Diego in the non-conference, and then they played a really good game against a very skilled Ole Miss team. Ole Miss, they just weren't accustomed to the athleticism from the guard play that Purdue is bringing to them. So I think it'll be okay. I absolutely think they're a Final Four team. Purdue, Maryland, absolutely a Final Four team. Altman gives Oregon a shot. He's already made it, right? Altman gives Oregon a shot to make a Final Four. I think Wisconsin, it's going to be tough, right? They're really good offensively. They really make free throws. All those nice things. It's hard. It's the way they've been playing has not lend themselves to a Final Four team. So it's going to be tough for them. Of course, Illinois, right? They can make a Final Four. After that, listen, I don't think Indiana is skilled enough to make a Final Four, but you just never know. Same with Ohio State. But the last team I'll mention, of course, Michigan State, but UCLA, if they can just get enough shot making, right? If they can just shoot the ball in the 40 percentile or more, they've got a chance as well. I think there's a lot of really good Big Ten teams. Listen, someone making the Final Four is a draw, right? Like it's the draw around you. How does it break? Who do you have to play? How does that work? So some of that's predicated on you clearing a path, and some of it is the path that clears around you. But if you said name one team that's going to make a Final Four, get one pick right now, I would say give me Maryland. I would take
Yep.
Maryland, right? And that's not
Yeah.
a knock at Michigan State, but I don't want to pick chalk. And it's not a
Mhm.
knock at anybody else, but I just think Maryland has the ability. They've improved. They've done a lot of really good things. They're better on the road this year. They're usually kind of home court warriors. They've been a little bit better on the road this year. Obviously, the win in Illinois really helped. But I think they're ready. I think they're ready for kind of the next step in the program development under Willard.
Yeah, I think Maryland is one of those teams up there. I worry about some of the lack of depth and stuff like that. They're getting guys coming in and giving them good minutes, but they're not really getting offensive production and maybe some rebounding production from some of them. Jordan Geronimo, I think he's a good player. His athleticism and everything he can bring into it, but really when you're looking at Maryland, you're looking at that starting five more than anything. So we'll see if Maryland can do it. I like that pick though. Last thing I'll ask you about with Purdue, and then we'll kind of be done here. Daniel Jacobson gets hurt early in the season. You
Yeah,
mentioned the rim protection and the 2-point defense, stuff like that. I agree with you. Zach Edey, like his defense was underrated the entire time. I said it all last year. It felt like every time you scored against Purdue, it was it was like a breath of fresh air.
sure.
There wasn't another team in the nation I felt like that against, but I felt like that against Purdue every single time somebody played them. Daniel Jacobson, he's not the player Edey is, obviously, but he does have the size. If he comes back next year, and stays healthy, could you see him being a major rim protector type piece for him that could help save this
Absolutely.
defense? Any thoughts?
Absolutely. Yeah, Jared, that's a really, really good point. Absolutely. Because we've seen Painter develop bigs, right, historically. So he knows, they know what Jacobs, they know what they're dealing with there. Jacobson knows how that he will improve if he keeps putting in the work. Absolutely. There is not a scenario in the Sun where Matt Painter is going to allow his team to be the worst defensive team in the league, right, against 2-point field goal percentage again next year. Like, that's not going to happen. So even if he goes on the other end of the spectrum, he's going to find players in the portal that are going to guard and guard willingly and have a little more athleticism on the wings. I think that's what they've missed this year. The player that they really missed that was a very dynamic for them last year was Lance Jones.
Yep.
And I think that's kind of lost too. Of course, Edie Smith were fantastic, Lawyer, Rent, like all those players were great. But the player that changed them from being a Sweet 16 team or an Elite 8 team to a Final Four team was Lance Jones. He could make some threes and he can guard the other team's best guards. So he stabilized the perimeter defense. Edie stabilized the interior defense. They don't have either one this year. They just don't have that wing that can really guard. So Lawyer plays a ton of minutes and he can't do what Jones did last year.
Yeah, yeah, they do have Will Berg, as Philip pointed out, but I mean he's got some offensive talent. He shot a really high 2 point percentage there for a while, but yeah,
Yeah, but
he doesn't have a lot of great movement, and he fouled a lot from what I noticed too.
yeah, I mean, you can get away with Berg and some of these other players when you have some stabilizing pieces on the defensive end. But if you don't have them, you can't keep playing all shooters.
Yeah,
And if you do, you better win in the 80s. And you saw that against Indiana, right? When in the first half against Indiana, they made a bunch of shots and they looked like a Final Four team. In the second half, they didn't shoot the ball as well, right? They're human beings, right? They're not going to make everything. And they couldn't get any stops. I mean, it was the 30-5 start at Assembly Hall to start the second half. It was just a deluge of shot making for Indiana. They weren't even hard shots, right? They
yeah.
couldn't stop the bleeding. And that's the concern with this year's Purdue team. It'll be vastly different next year. But listen, if you are a fan of Purdue and you listen to the podcast and like you're having a rough season and you're a 4 or 5 seed, like you're doing just fine, right? There's a lot of Big Ten schools that would sign up for that in blood. So Purdue's going to be just fine. Heck, it might end up being a wonderful season. It absolutely could be. They got some really good players, but they're going to have to improve defensively over the next couple of weeks.
All right, great stuff, Jason. Really appreciate your time being here. You always bring fantastic analysis, not only with bracketology, but just on the teams overall and their gameplay and everything. So really appreciate your time. Why don't you tell people where they can find you out one more time?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, JR. On X at Big Underdog Blog and my website, big-underdog.com.
Very good. Thanks everybody for watching. Thank you for whether you're live or listening on podcast. We really appreciate it. We will be back Wednesday night recapping all of the games from the Big Ten tournament. I'll have a guest with me, and we'll be able to do that. So have a good one, everybody. See you next time.